Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody, the podcast where we talk with people behind top nonprofit galas and signature fundraising events to showcase how they positively transform their communities. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today we have a really fun guest on. His name is Jordan Drum, and he is the Director of Development for Performing Arts Houston. And each spring, they have a wonderful gala called the Kaleidoscope Ball, and it is always really a lot of fun. It's probably one of Houston's most fun events every year. And, Houston is very much a city that celebrates the arts, and it's organizations like Performing Arts Houston that really kind of demonstrate why that is the case. So I figured it would be a really good time to talk about the Kaleidoscope Ball, the Performing Arts Houston, and, learn a little bit more about both. So with that, Jordan, welcome. And I'm so excited to have you here as a guest today.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for all the kind words about the event. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So why don't you talk a little bit about the mission of Performing Arts Houston?
So, Performing Arts Houston's the short version of the mission is to connect audiences with artists. And so, the longer version is kind of how we do that, connecting audiences with exceptional artists through diverse performances and learning experiences. We are a nonprofit presenter. We were established in 1966 as Society for the Performing Arts. So we changed our name a couple of years ago now. I can't believe it's been that long, but have a very long history of essentially bringing in touring artists from around the world to Houston that, were it not for Performing Arts Houston, simply just wouldn't be here to perform for Houston audiences.
Fantastic. And you mentioned how you rebranded from Society of the Performing Arts to Performing Arts Houston. What advice would you give to somebody who, may be looking to kind of rebrand a name, when you go through that transition and you go through that change?
Oh, that's such a good question. We did that kind of coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we had just gone through a pretty substantial strategic planning process, both leading up to the pandemic and then during the pandemic. So, our staff had quite a bit of time to think about that. And, I think a lot of what a strategic plan is sort of putting on paper what people already sort of know in the back of their heads a little bit. And that's something, the name and the brand is something that I think has been at the forefront, some of our board members' minds for a while, certainly our staff. And so, as far as advice, make sure everybody's on the same page, because although it's been a wonderful process for us and we love the new name and the new brand and kind of what it signals, we still have folks that recognize us only when we say, Society for the Performing Arts. So, make sure that everybody's on board with it, I think is maybe the best advice I could give, and find a really good agency that can lead you through that process.
Fantastic advice. I appreciate that. And I know you've been, so you've been with the organization for a while. So you were with, and that's the reason I kind of asked that question was, I know you've been there. You've been with, with Performing Arts Houston, formerly Society of Performing Arts for a minute. So talk a little bit about how you initially got involved with this organization and, also why, what has made you stay for over a decade? Because I mean, I always look for that with how well a nonprofit's run. And when I see staff that's there for 10 plus years, I know it's a well-run organization.
Yes. I I originally came to the organization as Director of Education and Community Engagement. So I came from the program side. This is back in 2014. I was living in Phoenix, and my now wife was living in New York, and we were trying to find a major city that we could both find a job in instead of doing the whole commute back and forth between the two cities and long distance relationship thing. So we settled on Houston and started applying to jobs. And I'd worked in education programming for the Phoenix Symphony prior to this, and this position at then the Society for the Performing Arts came up, and applied, and was so thrilled to get that job. And I was in that role for I think about 3 years before I was kind of asked to interview for the development position when it came open. And it took a little convincing, to be honest. I wasn't really sure if this is the way that I wanted to go, and I'm thrilled that I did. To answer your question about why I've been around here so long, I think what is unique about our organization and what is a strength, and of course a challenge sometimes as well, is the variety and diversity of what we do. Every year we are presenting artists that I've never heard of before, I've never seen before, and so I have a classical sort of music training background, and there's still contemporary music being created, but there's so many other art forms out there too. So being able to be exposed to new artists, new art forms, every weekend, every show, even season to season, how much that can change, has kept me interested. It's kept me learning. I found some of my favorite authors that I didn't know existed. I've come across ensembles, and I didn't know anything about dance when I first arrived at this organization. That's just this entire world that I've been able to explore. So I think that's what does it for me personally, is that it's always new, it's always changing, and that means that work every day is always new and always changing, and no 2 days are the same.
Absolutely. And I know that you had, after a few years you transitioned into the development role. What was because you're in front of people, but you're in front of people in such a different way between those two roles. So, what advice would you give to someone? Because we have quite a few people that work for nonprofits, that listen to this program. What advice would you give to somebody who, they're at, when you're asked or you apply to do a different functional role within an organization that may require a different skill set?
You know, I I had done some sort of some professional development at over at Rice. They've got the Leadership Institute for Nonprofit Executives program, and I happened to have gone through that program in the year leading up to this transition. So that certainly helped me have sort of a baseline understanding of the theory of of fundraising, right? Um, I had also started participating in some of those conversations with funders, specifically, obviously, for education programming at the time. And so I was comfortable in it. If somebody was transitioning into fundraising from the program side, I would expect, if they're coming from the program side, that they already have a belief in what they are, you know, what they're fundraising for, right? And I think that is just absolutely critical. People can tell when it's sort of an inauthentic belief in what you're asking them to support and partner with you on. And so um, don't take a fundraising job if you can help it. Obviously I'm privileged to not be in that position, and not everyone is, but if you can help it, don't take a fundraising job for a cause that you don't believe in yourself.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned, before, you've had a background in music. So talk a little bit about, what makes you so passionate about music and the arts? Because I know for you it had started kind of at a younger age based on your educational background.
Yes, I had a music education background in my undergrad, and I actually taught a little bit of music at junior high and high school level before going to grad school, and was really interested in teaching college for a little while. I think music, in particular for me, it moves me. And experiencing music with other people moves me. I think the arts in general. You may have heard the phrase "bread and roses," which is this quote from um, a suffrage, Helen Ty, I think, was a suffragist in the early 20th century, and she gave a speech, and it incorporated that line. It turned into a poem, and so give us bread, but give us roses, right? So um, there's so many important nonprofits that are doing critical work for our city, and obviously across the country in the United States, that are helping with health and human services, and feeding folks these basic needs. And I think um, those things are obviously critical, but it's not enough to just sort of survive. People need to thrive, and I think that's what the arts do for a society. They're the roses, and for me, being able to put together an annual season that without our supporters we wouldn't be able to pull off, and allowing Houston audiences to be exposed to a lot of these artists again that would not come were it not for Performing Arts Houston. That is what gets me up in the morning. It's me excited.
That's fantastic. And, what have you learned, because you mentioned, that you didn't necessarily know, you knew a lot about music, but not some of the other genres. What, in your role, what have you learned to appreciate about other art forms, in your role from especially from a development perspective, because you're kind of looking at it from the, we got to raise money to keep the lights on perspective.
Yeah, I think I guess the angle I'll approach that question with is, I appreciate how much I don't know about other art forms. And I often talk to folks that know a heck of a lot more about dance than I do. And so obviously I try to, stay informed on not just dance. There's so many different genres that we present. It's sort of impossible to be an expert on everything. And so, you have to trust the programming folks, the education team and the artistic programming folks to know that they know what they're talking about when they put this stuff together, and to, as much as possible, put them in front of the funders, because I know that they can speak more eloquently to some of these things than I can. And then I think also it's being able to speak a little bit about how we fit in our city's larger ecosystem too. Obviously, we have incredible producing organizations in Houston. We are blessed to have, just top-notch symphony and ballet and opera and resident theaters and musical theater. And so, we sort of fill a niche there, that we do a lot of things that they don't do. And there is some overlap there, obviously, but knowing that there are, these other organizations there, and we are filling a role, bringing the outside in versus, you know, the artists that live here. Being able to speak to that, I think, is also pretty critical.
There were two things in that answer that I really appreciated you saying. The first is that you do not have to be the foremost expert in every single thing. That you put way too much pressure on yourself when you do, and I'm glad you acknowledge that. And secondly, that leverage the resources around you. So like you had mentioned, bringing in program folks to talk about certain aspects that you may not be as, expert on when you're trying to, let's say, recruit a major donor. It shows that the organization is cohesive, and it shows the organization is tied together, and it shows that there's a level of trust between you all to really allow donors to see, okay, this organization is well put together, and if this person doesn't have exactly what I'm looking for, they know who can pull in, they can pull in, and they can get the answer that they need before deciding, to invest slash donate to your organization.
We're a small team. We're just 15 folks, and so again, compared to many of the arts organizations in the theater district here in Houston, we're tiny, and so we're all in the office, and they are. I come into work and I'm seeing basically the entire staff every single day, and so yes, trust is huge.
Absolutely. And, I want to turn and talk a little bit about the Kaleidoscope Ball some. So, it has what I have found about that organization over the years, and I've been doing this 15 years, and I've known about the Kaleidoscope Ball, and I live in Austin, but I've known about it probably probably from year one or year two, is that you all really draw some really, really actively involved people in the community, major philanthropists, major donors. I've seen people like Lynn Wyatt walk through your doors, and that's a huge endorsement of, what you all do. What is one thing a person or an organization can do to create a devoted following for its annual fundraiser, gala or signature fundraiser?
It's such a good question. You mentioned, I think, somewhere in the intro or earlier in our discussion, it being fun. Certainly, a fundraiser should raise funds, right? That's critical to the event, goes without saying. But I think if you're worried about your guests having a good time first and foremost, then the money follows. Um, you know, Whenever I stepped into this role, I was really lucky to, as you mentioned, this event, again, Society of Performing Arts, when it was, we called it the Gala, and now into the Kaleidoscope Ball. We sort of had a culture of fun already, so I can't take any credit for that. People like to come and they like to enjoy themselves, and they don't leave. Whenever we transition from the dance band to the DJ, they stick around. There isn't some mass exodus at the end of the auction. And I can't take credit for that. I would love to, but I think worrying about making it fun, I think is really critical. I think also consistency year to year. We have really focused on, because so much of what we do, as I mentioned, programmatically is different. We try to control the things we can and make certain things consistent, having a consistent framework at least within which we can, place new artists, new themes, that sort of thing. So, whether that is, when the invitation print deadline is, and trying to keep that rather consistent compared to the event, whether that is making sure that the know before you go email goes out at a certain time. Folks get the digital invitation, the email to their guests at a certain time. Um, trying to create some sort of consistency year to year so people know what to expect and making it easy. I think those are all, again, with being fun, I think those are all pretty important.
I'm glad you brought up the invitation piece because so much stuff is digital. And, I have a paper background, did a magazine for a long time. And each year I do get your invitation in the mail. And it is always beautiful. It is always like, it's going to be fun because Kaleidoscope first is it's an array of colors. It's kind of like we'll call it an alternate rainbow because that's kind of basically what a kaleidoscope is. But they are always they're beautiful. They say what the event's about. They say what the funds are going to be raised for, and it's really captivating when you see that. And I like that now that you say it, we always get it sometime in the late fall, either just before or just after. So we know when we're going to get it in the mail. So that consistency is really important that they can get it in their mind to go far enough out. And especially in a city like Houston, where there's a lot of galas happening, a lot of really good ones. I think that's where one way I have seen, a performing arts Houston really, raise above the pack in a lot of ways in doing that. So I'm glad you really brought that up.
Yeah, I'll mention, I think our board, especially these last few years coming out of COVID and before, but specifically after we rebranded it, the Kaleidoscope Ball and came out of COVID, they've been such a huge part of making that event what it is. And we've set records for funds raised the last, 3 years and hope to do so again this year. And um, they have been a huge driver of that consistency, that repetition year to year, asking for that, and it's paid off.
I'm glad you mentioned, the strong board, because there's almost kind of like I always think a triangle of success or, a three-legged stool of success. And one is the organization, two is the board, and the third is, and it's a good segue to this next question, is about event chairs. And, for you from a development perspective, I know that is, a good relationship with an event chair is critical to an event success. So what are the keys in your mind of having a strong relationship with an event chair?
I think, you know, recognizing and just always remembering that they are volunteers and they are there of their own volition and hopefully their passion for what you're raising funds for. They don't have to be there, and I think you have to keep that top of mind. I think also trying to meet them where they are. So different chairs provide different skills. Some may be really interested in focusing on the auction, and that's what they want to, put their weight and time behind. Others, want to set a certain, record for, table sales, that sort of thing. Others are much more involved in, the decor and the theme and playing those elements out. And obviously everyone is some combination of those things and more. But I think trying to find out early, where they want to concentrate their efforts and being adaptable to be able to say, yes, we can support you in that, and we can take care of these other things that you don't want to focus on. Not taking the one size fits all approach, I think is critical.
I really like that. And I like that you talked about different chairs can bring different strengths. And what that actually does when you lean into that
Mhm.
is it prevents your event from becoming stale
Mhm.
because there's going to be different things that guests are going to experience each year, especially, if you've got people that go, and I know many people go, performing artists in the Kaleidoscope Ball is one of their must attend events each year or each spring. And I want to talk about next, and this is kind of a good segue into theme. So I did not mention the theme at the top of the show because I wanted Jordan to talk about it. So each year your themes are always really, really, really fun. And like I said in the invitation, those shine through. Talk about this year's theme and how you all as an organization slash team selected it.
All right, so this is a big topic. We needs a little bit of background. So again, coming out of the pandemic, when we were restarting, I think in 2022, I think was our first one back. We decided that we wanted to do this kaleidoscope ball thing, and really what that suggests to your point, right? That a different kind of rainbow because of the variety of what we do artistically. Um, we are bringing a kaleidoscope of performances every year, and that is what we're going for at the ball. It is a kaleidoscope of different performances, but we tried to come up with a way to sort of tie those performances together with some sort of theme. So in year one, we started with celebrating Houston, and so through that we were able to highlight various parts of Houston's culture artistically. We were um, that was a whole ton of fun to do, and so we kept going with that, and we kind of kept the city thing going, and that has been the framework that we've been working on. So our chairs the next year, New Orleans was home and a huge part of their lives, and obviously sort of a sister city to Houston in many ways. And so we were able to pivot the next year to a New Orleans theme, a Garden District theme, and again showcase the sort of broad artistic representation of New Orleans, throughout the night, from the cocktail hour all the way through, to the end of the evening. Um, Gosh, last year was Mariposas de Guadalajara, so it was butterflies of Guadalajara, and so we were focusing on Mexico. Guadalajara, the state it's in Mexico, are home to ranchero music and luckily tequila, and so we had a ton of fun with that, obviously, and brought an artist in, who's from Mexico originally, and we just had a blast there. Um, this year our chairs are Margaret and Brian Bravo, and they've spent a lot of time in New York, and we haven't done New York yet. In doing the research for the theme and the brainstorming, we realized we had another artist that we were presenting this year. A couple of artists actually that were playing some Gershwin in honor of the 100th anniversary of Rhapsody in Blue and the premiere of that composition. And so we thought that'd be a great theme this year, tie it back to New York, go jazz age. There's so much to play with there. You can go to the jazz clubs. You can obviously it's the Gilded Age and the Gatsby element, and so we've had a ton of fun playing with what we can do there in terms of prohibition and speakeasies, and have a lot of fun things planned for specifically cocktail hour and arrival, and we're going to completely flip what we've been doing in the venue to align with the theme. So, as far as picking a theme, it really is for me personally is maybe my least favorite part of the process, because it's fun, but also it's just so hard, and it can be a bit of a slog to find the right thing. But once you arrive on the right thing, you kind of know, and so once you're there and you're running, it's fun to play with. But yeah, getting to that point and selecting the theme is always a really sort of hard part of the planning process.
Thank you so much for that response. And what I loved about that response, like when you kind of talked about the speakeasy, when you walk into the space, and the Wortham Center is just a world-class, like I already kind of have in my mind, I'm like, I can't wait to see the images of what you all do with that, because I know it will be really, really cool, because that space lends itself to something like that. I think that's just amazing.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Now, while we're at the go, you had mentioned before, you're there to fundraise. So, how do you, as a development executive, utilize the Kaleidoscope Ball to really further connect and engage with either major donors that are already there, but also the prospective newer ones that do come, that may be the first time that they've done anything with performing arts Houston, or they've heard about it and a friend brought them?
Yeah. I mentioned fun earlier. Um, I think that's first and foremost making sure whether they're existing supporters or, again, this is their first time, that it is an easy event to attend. Because as you mentioned, there are so many of these. I know a lot of folks feel like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon before an event, oh, I've got to put the tux on, and it's a thing to get out and do that. So you got to make it easy and fun. I think we try to tell our story, which again is a bit of a challenge given the kind of variety of what we do. Um, but that's obviously critical. We try to focus particularly on sort of the ball for us is a bit of a reunion, right? Everybody, all this existing supporters, the board, current board, former board members, they're all in the same room. It's pretty much, other than, an occasional annual board meeting, it's one of the only times you have all of your supporters or a vast majority of them all in the room at the same time. So there's a bit of a reunion feel to it. Um, and we just try to make sure we get out of the way as much as possible. Um, so yeah, I'm sort of going around your question a bit. For existing supporters, it's a reminder, right, of why they support us. It's our chance to remind them, and that's really our focus. For new folks, the ball is obviously critical to getting folks interested. It's rare to have sort of a captivated audience that you can speak to, but you can overdo it, right? And so you have to be careful there. Um, and we just view it as one touch point. It's an awesome touch point. It can be a significant touch point, but it does just because someone gives, even if it's a large amount of money that night, that doesn't mean that they're in they're in from here on out, right? You've got to do the follow up. You've got to continue to cultivate that relationship and get them more involved afterwards. So it's such a great event. Again, it's such a wonderful sort of homecoming for all of our supporters. But it's just one touch point, and so um, you can't squeeze sort of an entire sort of relationship building process all into one.
Well, I'm glad you ended with relationship building because I have a follow-up question that I like asking development professionals. I don't do it often enough, but it's one that I always like to ask. And that is, because there's kind of there's two different types of supporters that come to these. There's individuals and there's corporate. What are the similarities and differences in your mind, especially in Houston? Because Houston does provide a lot of corporate support, I think more so than a lot of other cities. Companies really do get behind nonprofits. So what are the similarities and differences in how in attracting and how you may approach, a corporate donor versus an individual philanthropist?
Yeah, they are similar in that everyone, whether that is an individual or a corporation, has a motivation for giving, and they have to have an affinity for what you're doing in the arts, and so there are very generous individuals in this town that that the arts just aren't sort of the focus of their. It's not a philanthropic priority for them, and that's fine. Every single person is different. Same thing with corporations. There are, as you mentioned, we have this incredible corporate philanthropic culture here in Houston. I feel like we benefit from so many sort of legacy, foundations and just a culture of philanthropy in this town. And in the same vein, though, right? Corporations, some of them want to support the arts, and that's what it's all about. And they're focusing on sort of the quality of life for their employees and attracting talent, and others do not, and they have more of a United Way focus, or maybe they have a focus in other areas, right, geographically. So I guess just understanding that everyone is different, and everyone has a slightly different reason for doing what they do. But as far as how they differentiate, individuals don't tend to have big shifts in their philanthropic priorities, right? I suppose that does happen to some degree, but if somebody loves the arts and is always supportive of the arts, it's pretty likely that they'll continue to do so. Whereas corporations can change, right? And so whether that's leadership changes or maybe you've got board representation, it's just a little bit more fluid. And so, certainly being adaptable there, and also understanding, right? We've had longtime corporate supporters that, whether that's through sort of a change of strategy or leadership or what have you, who have said, hey, we're not going to be supporting anymore. And you've got to respect that and understand it, and make sure you've got good prospects and you've been building relationships with others. But yeah, I think in general, individuals tend to be slightly more steady, just in terms of their priorities compared to corporations.
That's good to know, and that allows you, from a long-term planning perspective, to really accentuate shifts. And if you've got a good base of both, it can, if something does shift, you're able to absorb that a little bit more easily. So I really liked and appreciated that answer. And back when we were talking a little bit earlier about the theme, you kind of sort of started to tease kind of what this year's ball may entail. So talk a little bit about what guests can expect to experience, anything that you can tease at this year's Kaleidoscope Ball.
Yeah, and so what can I just so we are they will certainly have a very prohibition sort of speakeasy feel to the evening. There's going to be a lot of dancing throughout the evening, a lot of swing dancing. We've got some incredible talent that has been booked that we haven't announced yet, but some of the best in the world that will be coming in to perform. Um, we we always have at the end of our evening sort of our after party, which is sort of when the DJ kicks off, and we have some after party ticket buyers that kind of come on. That part in particular this year should be a lot of fun. I expect quite a surge of energy there at the end, again, without saying too much. Um, like every year, we've got a great live auction planned. Still being planned. We're a few months out, but certainly coming together there. Um, and and as always, it's going to be fun. I think we always try to make sure that folks have enough time to socialize. That they are there to interact with one another again, whether that's with other supporters at other tables, and especially with their guests. And so we try to be respectful of that and not overdo it and over program it. So yeah, as always, the Kaleidoscope Ball is going to be a blast.
It will be. I'm glad though that you mentioned one thing there towards the end that, yes, people are there to give, but they are also there to socialize. And I know sometimes nonprofit galas can struggle with that because they think it's got to be all about the mission. But you got to remember, people are coming, if often they're coming in the evening, that's personal time. So you've got to be able to mix both so that they can understand why they're there, but also be able to mingle with their friends and also make new friends and meet new people.
Yeah, I wish I had come across Shelby Hodge's rules for non like 101 rules for nonprofit meals and luncheons earlier on in my career. I think she said something like, keep remarks to keep the program to like 10, 15 minutes. We can't keep it that short. I always aspired to that, but we try to keep it to 15 or 20. And as I mentioned earlier, you make it fun and you make it easy. And so, if somebody comes and they have a good time, they're not going to dread it the next year. If you talk for, an hour and a half and your program just takes up an entire night, they're not going to want to return, right? Or if the music is too loud while dinner's happening, they can't speak to each other. Those little things matter. And so you want to make it easy for them to say, oh, this event's coming up and I can't wait to attend.
Absolutely. And with the program with the arts, sometimes I want to say it can lend itself to go a little bit further, largely because what you all can do is just bring in your roster of talent to actually perform numbers, so that the donors, and that's kind of a way that's what I love about arts events in particular, is it mirrors the giving and the socializing slash fun kind of together. And I think there's no better way to do that
Yeah.
than through performative art, because people can just kind of look at each other and be like, wow. And after it's done, people can be like, well, I remember, because like I remember one year I went and there was like the youth choir did and all that jazz from Chicago. And people were talking
Oh,
about the
yeah, that
first
was it.
time they saw Chicago. And
Yeah.
there's something really magical about arts organizations that they can do that the program can shepherd conversation that's fun in a way that a medical or children's charity may not be able to do.
Yeah, we're really lucky. You're absolutely right. The arts lend themselves to these types of events, and the entertainment portion of things, especially again, since we do touring artists, being able to bring those folks in to tie with the theme is great. We also have this program that we started a few years ago, the Houston Artist Commission Project. It's called Me Now. We started that, so again, sort of during the pandemic, and it's grown since then. While historically we have focused on bringing the outside in, we have been building this program and commissioning 3 or 4 local artists, local companies these past few years, and so they create new works, and we go through the entire process of getting that work up and running and present it. And it's been great to be able to incorporate them into the event these last few years to speak about their experience. You'll be hearing from one of those artists this year at the ball. So having those local artists here too, that we can sit at tables and that we can invite year after year and continue to make sure they're part of the organization, part of the family. It's been really great on my end.
That's fantastic. And I know we're coming up on time here, but I always like to end with this one question with guests, and that is, what piece of advice would you give to someone looking to plan their first gala?
I'll go back to keep the program short. So if I had to pick one thing, there's a bunch that I could, talk about, whether that is sound levels. I guess I'm talking about them. I shouldn't. If I have to keep one, it's keep the program short. People are there to have a good time, to see their friends, to enjoy the evening, and you've got to make sure you do everything you can to make that possible.
Absolutely. And, because the event is so fun, it's great to see that, each year, the last few years, you've broken fundraising records each year. And I know that, and I'm hoping for you guys that this year is no different. And, this has been a wonderful time chatting with you, Jordan. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And the 2025 Kaleidoscope Ball, Rhapsody in Blue, benefiting Performing Arts Houston, will be held on April 12th, 2025 at the Wortham Center for the Performing Arts in Houston, Texas. For more information, please visit performingartshouston.org. And that will do it for this episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day and take care.